Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full House of the Dragon Season 3, Episode 3 video. There are a whole bunch of WTF moments, Easter eggs, references to the books, so we will break it all down. Rhaenyra asking, will the real Daemon please stand up? His dragon Tessarion also seemed pretty confused by what the Greens were doing. This is not the person that rides me. I've never seen this person before. The episode is titled Rhaenyra Triumphant, which is meant to be ironic because there are so many problems around the realm that she needs to solve, particularly King's Landing, and it starts to seem like everybody, both the nobles, the lords, and the small folk, are going to start hating her because of what she's forced to do during this episode, the decisions she's forced to make. So it's almost like she's anything but triumphant. The cold open this week starts with Daemon in the Dragon Seeds meeting with Aemond Hightower and the Greens, asking them to bend the knee and for Daemon Targaryen to take him captive because of his claim on the Iron Throne. Bull Jon Roxton is here with him, great to see him. Brasso from Andor. Rhaenyra offers to let them go as long as they bend the knee, and he calls Daemon the Rogue Prince, which is his nickname in the canon, like he's called that amongst the people around the realm because he was so wild when he was growing up. Daemon also reminds them that they just killed Otto Hightower, his uncle, and he's happy to kill all of them too. Daemon really seems like he's almost disappointed when Aemond bends the knee because he really wants an excuse to kill all of them, which he tells Rhaenyra later, like, we should just burn the lot of them. He even pays off Ulf's comments from earlier that he was not privy to, that Ulf thought that he was going to get a castle, saying that he's going to name him the Lord of Old Town and give him the Hightower. Aemond then bends the knee, but it is a falsehood to get Daemon to leave with his dragons because all the dragon seeds are there. And if it wasn't clear, Aemond's sword here is also a Valyrian sword just like Daemon. His is named Vigilance. It is the ancestral sword of House Hightower. Bull Jon Roxton here also has his own Valyrian sword. It's called Orphan Maker. Way more hardcore of a name for a sword. So everybody meeting here in the middle here has a Valyrian sword. You also notice in the background, the fake Daemon is riding Tessarion. I wonder how they pulled that off, how they got Tessarion to agree to that, because usually when somebody who's not a dragon's rider tries to climb on their back without the rider themselves also being there with them, it winds up in that person getting eaten. Maybe the real Daemon was right there behind Tessarion, patting her on the back, saying, please do not eat this person, like just hold steady for a couple more minutes till they get off of you. Daemon also reminds you that Daemon is Viserys' youngest child with Alicent. Alicent sent him to Old Town years ago to ward with Aemond, which is why none of the main characters on the show in King's Landing know what he actually looks like, because the last time they saw him, he was a baby. The whole reason why Alicent sent him to Old Town in the first place was because she'd done such a bad job of raising her other children that she didn't want the same thing to happen to Daemon. So she's like, we need to send you away from all this craziness that's happening around the royal family. But as we see, Aemond Hightower seems like he's turned Daemon into his glorified squire, which was exactly what Alicent did not want. So we'll probably learn more about that in next week's episode. There are a lot of things in this episode that Rhaenyra yells at Alicent for, questions that she wants answered like, where's the gold hidden? All these different things that Alicent doesn't actually know for the most part, or that other men around her have basically countermanded her decisions, basically going against what she wanted. So even though she does bear some complicity in the Dance of the Dragons itself, in the inciting event, when it comes to Daemon in particular, it's another example of like the men around her doing things that she did not want to happen. During the new intro scene, they show Rhaenyra under Syrax. This is meant to represent her taking the Iron Throne. This is Daemon and Mysaria next to her, the White Worm, because she kind of becomes her Mistress of Whispers in this episode as she begins to name a new small council. Next to them, we see the other Dragon Seeds, her other main supporters. Then the rat next to the Iron Throne is also meant to be foreshadowing for the rat banquet that she throws for all the nobles later in the episode, taking all their extra food to give to the people, also making enemies of the nobles in the city, which will be another bad thing for Rhaenyra long term.
This is unconscionable.
We're being robbed.
This is going to be a big theme of her tenure as Queen of the Realm, in that a lot of people will hate her at all different ends of the social spectrum. The highborn people, the lords, the nobles, and the small folk eventually too. Just all people will have a bunch of reasons to not like her. But to be fair, a lot of the people that don't like her are terrible people. You also notice all the small folk here seemingly both terrified of her and kind of love her for trying to give them food. I think this is meant to depict her handing out all the food later in the episode, but you also notice there's blood red all around these people here, implying that bad things are going to happen this season, and the small folk might wind up hating her too eventually. When the tapestry rips apart, it's meant to be a reference to the Dance of the Dragons itself, the blacks versus the greens, and the realm being torn apart. It also kind of feels like Rhaenyra's mind is slowly being torn apart as she goes sleepless for longer and longer. Like she goes full Homelander in this episode, just staring off blankly with all the sound draining out and her hearing this rumbling in the background every once in a while. Some of you probably clocked that she's starting to look a little bit like Daenerys when she was slowly going mad as the Targaryen madness started creeping up in her. I'm sure that will be uttered at some point during the season 2, the Targaryen madness. It also did not help that Daemon, towards the end of the episode, literally quotes what Daenerys eventually winds up doing at the end of Season 8, right before Jon killed her, saying that they were going to conquer the entire known world and some of the unknown parts of the world too. We will get to that part later in the video too, because Daemon also drops some cool lore from the books. The opening scene starts with Rhaenyra talking to Daemon on the morning of her first day as queen, sitting the Iron Throne. The air being thick with ghosts is a reference to a number of dead characters, her dead children, like Jace in particular most recently, because she literally sees a vision of him, and her dead father, Viserys, her mother, Otto Hightower, who she just killed personally, a lot of dead people floating around the Red Keep. The camera then starts panning in on her head and you hear that low rumbling sound as all the other audio around her sort of drains out. This happens a number of times in the episode, and it's similar to what Daenerys was looking and feeling like when she started to hear the bells in the background and go mad and start burning King's Landing, because every time Rhaenyra goes into Homelander mode in this episode, she hears the ringing of a bell, the toll of a bell. That's what they called the episode where Daenerys went mad, Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 5, when she started burning King's Landing. Doesn't mean that Rhaenyra is going to burn King's Landing, but it does make you feel very uneasy about where things are headed for her character. Like, this is not a good direction you're going. Make the tapestry metaphor, Rhaenyra is slowly unraveling as we see her on the Iron Throne. The actual room that they're in is her father's room. It's the king's chambers. Aegon slept in here. Now they're her chambers, the queen's chambers. Later in the episode, she also has trouble sleeping in the bed. Like, she can't sleep. She's kind of haunted by his ghost, her mother's ghost, which is why she goes to sleep with Daemon instead. So she's kind of afraid of the room at the moment. She tries to plan her formal coronation, a tourney, a grand procession through the city for the occasion, things that you would normally do when a new king or queen is named. The whole idea is that metaphorically the realm won't support her as much because it won't be viewed as quite as legitimate unless she goes through a lot of these formalities, having these big tourneys, these big ceremonies, all this typical stuff. It's one of the many reasons why the High Septon tries to decline her request to formally anoint her like you would do with a new king or queen. Luther Largent is with them, the head of the Gold Cloaks, because the Gold Cloaks are still kind of her temporary Queen's Guard until she appoints a new Queen's Guard. She says later that's going to be Daemon's task, but also tells Daemon to go to the Vale, which is probably where he's going to learn that his daughter, Rhaena, is the one riding Sheepstealer, who Rhaenyra wants to destroy. So we will see if Daemon ever gets around to actually naming a new Queen's Guard for her. This will also cause more problems later. Like, there are a lot of problems that they set up here, like little bombs that are going to go off later in the season. Like, these are things that are going to be a much bigger problem in a couple episodes. They start the process of redecorating, getting rid of all of Aegon's banners and things, which they burn at the end of the episode. And at the small council meeting, they learned that the Greens hid the crown's gold. Tywin Lannister, who was the master of coin, divided the crown's gold into 3 parts and hid them at Casterly Rock, the Iron Bank of Braavos, and then Old Town, where the Hightowers rule, where Aemond Hightower is now the lord. They only have a couple weeks worth of gold, and without it they can't hold a coronation or do any of the things that they would normally do to make Rhaenyra seem more legitimate as the queen. And also, there are a lot of people, like the small folk, are going hungry because of the blockade that she herself told them to do on King's Landing for these last several months, trying to starve out the Greens. So there's just a lot of different problems in King's Landing right now that she needs to solve, and some of the problems are of her own making. They wanted that to seem clear, that a lot of the things that happen in the episode are bad, but some of the things they themselves actually caused. Speaking of which, Jasper Wilde was one of the other people who knew where they hid the gold, but they also just killed him, beheading him in the recent episode, so they can't figure it out. Corlys also mentions that Triarchy men are still on the loose, taking hostages around the realm. That'll be important for later, like one of the big potholes that's going to be a problem later on, so remember that. But to her credit, Rhaenyra guesses correctly that the Lannisters might have some of her gold and then demands tribute from all the great houses, which is also going to drive a wedge between her and the other great lords of the realm, which she doesn't want. That will be bad. Like, you don't want all the most powerful people and the small folk at the same time all hating you. She then fires her Black Council back on Dragonstone and gets ready to appoint a new one. There are a couple people that are already kind of acting as members of that small council, like Mysaria, for instance, is the new Mistress of Whispers. They remind her that Aemond and Vhagar are still at Harrenhal, or last seen at Harrenhal, but they don't know where Aemond has gone, and Daemon does mention Alice Rivers. Just to remind you, we'll learn what she's doing with Aemond in next week's episode. I cannot wait for that storyline to get super weird. She also reminds everyone that she wants Sheepstealer on a platter and his writer, setting up the next stage of the Rhaena storyline. Also remember that she's sending Daemon to the Vale, which is where Sheepstealer and Rhaena are, possibly setting up further schism between the two of them, so we'll talk about that later in the episode too. Rhaenyra also says she's going to grant Harrenhal to whoever can kill Aemond, which would certainly solve Alice Rivers' problems, but there are plot reasons why Aemond has to be around in Season 4, so we'll see how they try to weave this all together. Just can't wait to see if that comes together. She almost steps on the first rat, Orwell mentioning the killing of all the rat catchers because of the events of Blood and Cheese, something which Daemon was responsible for, like another example of the Blacks causing their own problems. But it also starts a deluge of different rat scenes that you see throughout the episode where more and more rats start popping up and setting her on the idea to serve the rats to the nobles. We get another moment where Rhaenyra faces another deluge of minor problems around the castle, and she goes to meet with Alicent and Helaena asking her if she knows where the gold is. The funny thing, though, is that Alicent actually does know where the gold is because she was at the small council meeting where Tywin Lannister said that he was going to divide the gold up and hide it in 3 pieces. So maybe the writers forgot about this, or maybe Alicent was just mentally asleep, but I didn't think she was trying to deceive Rhaenyra in this moment here. Like, she tries to tell her the truth. All these terrible things that are happening right now are because of things that men around me did, not things that I myself did. And if you couldn't tell, Rhaenyra desperately craves Alicent's approval as the new queen. Like, she wants Alicent to tell her, you're an amazing queen and the realm is so much better off with you being the queen on the Iron Throne, which Alicent does not want to give her. There's a little bit of dialogue where they remind you about Aegon still being alive on the run with Larys Strong, and they remind you about Sunfire in the episode too. They think that Sunfire is dead, but I do not think that Sunfire is dead. There were multiple Sunfire references.
Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
We get another scene of Rhaenyra starting to spiral a little with the voices start rumbling in her head again, like going into Homelander mode is probably the best way to describe it. She then explains that Helaena and Alicent are now prisoners of the Red Keep, confined to the castle, and can only go a couple of places in the castle like the gods would, and we're only allowed to see Jaehaera, Helena's daughter, a little bit each day. So they're just also further driving a wedge between her and Alicent and her and Helaena. She then reminds Luther Largent to bring her Joffrey from the Vale because he's her heir now, which will probably cross over with the Rhaena Sheepstealer storyline as well too. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening in the Vale very soon. This is also meant to set up her whole conflict with Corlys over legitimizing his bastards because Joffrey is a bastard. When she finally full-on hallucinates Jace, thinking that this serving boy is Jace, she hears the toll the bells a couple times, which, like I said, feels like a comp to Daenerys hearing the bells and her going full Mad Queen in that moment during Game of Thrones Season 8. I think the more interesting question is if Rhaenyra will start to experience more episodes like this where she mentally has a break and she just goes into Homelander mode in worse and worse ways. She meets with the High Septon in the throne room, who definitely is not a fan of hers and not a fan of dragons, spends most of their conversation saying how dragons are evil and an abomination and a curse upon life. Even though she's trying to butter him up a little bit, if they didn't make it clear in previous seasons or previous episodes, she does not really worship the faith of the Seven as much. She does pray to the Seven, but it always kind of felt like she was an old school Valyrian like Daemon, and they practiced the old Valyrian ways and Valyrian customs. But the whole idea here, the main sticking point, the reason why the High Septon doesn't want to anoint her publicly is because they haven't seen Aegon's body. Show me a body and then we'll anoint you. So the idea is no body, no death. We know that Aegon is still alive because we've seen him a couple times this season already, and he's on his way to Rook's Rest, where Sunfire's body is, which may or may not be dead, probably not dead. So it's almost comedic here when the High Septon is trying to explain to Rhaenyra what happens if we anoint you and then all of a sudden Aegon shows up again, which he probably will eventually by the end of the season. She tries to reiterate that the gods declared she must rule, and this is now a divine mission according to Aegon's prophecy of the Long Night and the Prince who was promised, making it seem like it's more of a religious crusade that she's on. And when the High Septon says, don't make an enemy of the faith, that's a reference to Maegor the Cruel, because Maegor was a huge enemy to the faith. The last trial of 7 before Night of the Seven Kingdoms, great episode, by the way, of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, was when the faith challenged Maegor to the trial of 7. It was 7 members of the faith that tried to kill Maegor in that trial of 7 and failed. Maegor wound up destroying the Great Sept of that time and then building the dragon pit where it used to be. She then has a very uncomfortable dinner with Corlys and his sons, who talks about his plan to legitimize them so that they can be his heirs, and she absolutely does not want to do it because of her sons being bastards. During the dinner here, before things turn between the two of them into like a really bad place, you can see that he's trying to bond with her over the fact that they both have bastards. Like, well, my sons, I didn't acknowledge them. Kind of like your situation too, a little bit, wink wink. And you can definitely tell that she's trying to avoid mentioning any talk of any kind of bastards at all. While this is happening, she also goes into Homelander mode again. She almost does this in every single conversation that she has, like every major conversation or anytime something difficult winds up happening. When she passes Baela, the reason why she's still pissed at her is probably because of Jace's death. Even though she doesn't totally blame her, she blames Sheepstealer way more. She kind of blames Baela a little bit. Then it kind of feels like her nuzzling up to Daemon because she's afraid of her father's bed because of all the ghosts. They want to make it seem like her and Daemon are lockstep together, but then they have this Sheepstealer storyline that they're probably weaving in, turning Rhaenyra into a version of Nettles, which will be a point of contention between the two of them. This will be a big thing in future episodes, because remember, Rhaenyra wants Sheepstealer's head on a platter and his rider, so Daemon probably isn't going to like that Rhaenyra wants his daughter to die.
But what crumbs of it may be snatched, I will devour.
Just something to remember in the back of your mind over the next couple of episodes. But it does kind of seem like the show is turning Rhaenyra into a version of Nettles from the book. So they're kind of doing the Nettles storyline, but the way the show is doing it is they're making it seem like Rhaenyra was always Nettles in the book, and the people who wrote the book were just confused about what was actually going on. We get a short scene of her with Alinda Massey getting dressed for her first day sitting the Iron Throne with her crown on. Alinda Massey has been one of her ladies-in-waiting for almost her entire life, and the idea is that she's like Rhaenyra's biggest supporter and biggest fan. She correctly tells Rhaenyra that wearing Jace's sword on the Iron Throne might present the wrong signal to the small folk, and then Rhaenyra drops 2 F-bombs in rapid succession because she starts her period right before she sits the Iron Throne. I think the reason why they did this is to pay off a line from the books where it says that people thought that the Iron Throne rejected Rhaenyra because she was found to be bleeding on it, but I think they're trying to say that she was bleeding on it because she was on her period. We never actually see the Iron Throne itself cut her, like she grips the swords and they don't cut her. Usually when somebody sits on the Iron Throne and they get cut by it, like they get cut by the actual swords, because the throne is made from a bunch of swords, symbolically it's viewed as the Iron Throne rejecting that person and them being wrong as the ruler. All the people talking to her about their problems are mostly to do with not enough food, not enough resources, or problems that she herself was responsible for. Like a really good example is that the extra dragons now that she's brought to the city because of the dragon seeds are eating almost every single resource in sight, everything that they can get their mouths on. And she herself created the blockade that initially created the hunger that they're going through right now. She then tries to open the Kingswood for the small folk to hunt in, but the Highborn people thinks that it's blasphemy. She still allows hunting of small animals though, so that might solve things short term. We'll see how that goes. The boar and stag mention also felt like a callback to her killing one during season 1 when she was younger. Aemond's friend from the brothels, Sylvie, comes back to tell her about the problem with all the rich people in the city hoarding food, setting up the rat banquet later in the episode. While this is happening, she also sees a rat literally crawling around the Iron Throne. Like, there are a whole lot of rats here, what are we going to do with all these rats? Why don't we kill them and then serve them to all these people? Interestingly, at the small council meeting the next day, Daemon seems like the only one who wants to go easy on the rich of the city, probably because he doesn't want to piss them off, and argues with Mysaria again. They're kind of like an old married couple in the way that they bicker, like old lovers just bickering with each other. While this is happening, Rhaenyra goes into Homelander mode again, and then they mention Baela. She thinks that Sunfire is dead. Like I said, many Sunfire mentions in the episode, probably because Sunfire is still very much alive. She then implies that once they find Sheepstealer's rider, she is going to devour them, devour justice. Like I said, possibly setting up a wedge between her and Daemon in the future once Daemon learns the truth that Rhaenyra is Sheepstealer's rider when he goes to the Vale. Then I love the way that her father becomes the final inspiration for her rat banquet in the episode. Like, her father probably wouldn't have thrown a rat banquet, but he would have thrown a regular banquet. They then meet with the Dragon Seeds to knight them like they said that they would. They insult Ulf White when they say that he can't name himself a Targaryen. Just another example of how they really don't like Ulf and how Ulf seems like he's starting to hate them more and more too, or giving him reasons not to like them. They give themselves basically their book names, though. Like in the books, he is called Ulf White, Hugh is called Hugh Hammer, and Adam is called Adam of Hull, eventually Adam Valerion. But they wind up using this as another build-up to her fight with Corlys over not letting him use the Valerion name yet. Daemon then recites the Oath of Knighthood, which we also just heard during Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Hugh Hammer asks about getting paid and reminds us that his wife went to Tumbleton, which we find at the end of the episode Aemond and the Greens have taken and are holding them all hostage, so it means that they're probably going to learn that Hugh's wife is being held hostage, which is bad because now they have leverage against the Dragon Seeds.
Find her only to hear that she's gone to live with her brother in Tumbleton.
They really want to make Ormond Hightower seem like he's a very clever person. Rhaenyra also mentions she's going to give him a house on Visenya's Hill. We'll see how they pay that off, but Visenya, you remember, is her favorite sister wife because she was so stabby. Rhaenyra now wants to walk around with a sword like Visenya did. Interestingly though, if you speak about Visenya's sword, she actually used that sword, Dark Sister, her Valyrian sword, to cut off Otto Hightower's head, but typically Daemon wields it. So probably for like a brief moment she felt like she was Visenya when she was doing that. We get a really quick scene of her meeting with Alicent again. She apologizes and asks for Otto Hightower's remains to be sent to Oldtown so he can be buried with Alicent's mother, his wife. They remember hanging out in her old room when they were children, like it's weird that we're hanging out here again as adults. They then talk about Rhaenyra taking over as queen and what things were like for Alicent when she was trying to manage the realm for Viserys on his last days, like when he was declining in health. And part of the idea here is that she's trying to explain to Rhaenyra that it's a slippery slope and she's going to have to make some real hard choices that are going to make her unpopular with a lot of people eventually, just because it'll be the right thing to do. And she herself, Alicent, did a lot of these things in the course of what became the Dance of the Dragons. Like a lot of these crazy things that I did were seemingly for the right reasons at the time. Or at least Alicent believed that they were the right reasons and it was a slippery slope. So the same thing is going to eventually potentially happen to Rhaenyra, who then tries to deny that she's going to turn into some kind of monster or like a terrible person and everybody will hate her. Like, that's never going to happen to me. Which in TV parlance means it's probably totally going to happen to her eventually. There's also a brief moment where Alicent tries to remind Rhaenyra that she's been using her father as an example of a great king, but the idea is that Viserys was a peacetime king and he wasn't that great of a king. Like, the Maesters don't view him as a very strong king because he never really did anything of real consequence. Basically, Viserys was famous for just throwing a lot of tournaments and a lot of parties, and that was about it. Then I love the way that they use the bell toll to transition to the rat banquet, and it's slowly revealed that Rhaenyra is feeding them all the rats and raiding all their stores to give all the food to the poor, pulling a Robin Hood, basically, on the rich of the city. When she says she comes to them as a conciliator, that's what King Jaehaerys was called, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, for his ability to heal the realm after Maegor the Cruel's war. But we will see if that winds up coming to pass, just because things seem like they're on a downward spiral for her right now. Kinda seems like everybody visibly throws up in their mouths at the sight of the rats, but when she gets up and leaves them, you kinda wonder who sat back down and ate their rat, because they were cooked, like it is food. She then runs into Dan Fogler, who you probably recognize from a bunch of different things, who's playing Torrhen Manderly from White Harbor. I believe he is going to become her new master of coin. Generally, it seemed like he was impressed by her and he is going to try and help her, like he's not meant to be an evil person. But it does kind of seem like he revels in the chaos of the moment of what's happening here, but it does point out to her that she was responsible for a lot of the problems she herself is now trying to solve. Daemon and Rhaenyra have one of the most amazing conversations in High Valyrian after this as they're watching the rich people leave, and they talk about getting money from Jane Eyre and the Vale, just setting up the whole sheep stealer storyline, but also Daemon basically giving you Daenerys' plot from the end of Game of Thrones Season 8, talking about conquering the world with their dragons. First he talks about pacifying the realm, then conquering the East, then as far as E.T., one of the first times we've heard E.T. mentioned in a long time on Game of Thrones. Then when he mentions the city at the edge of the world where the men have wings, this is a cool lore drop. It's literally called the City of Winged Men canonically, and it's a legend that people tell each other within the world of Westeros. It's meant to lie on the shore of the hidden sea at the southern edge of the Grey Waste, and some argue, like the Maesters argue, that it might just be a tribe of people living there that wear special capes, not actual men with actual physical wings. But part of the idea here when Rhaenyra says, I always would have liked to have visited that place, is the idea that she grew up hearing that legend. But Daemon's whole declaration that they are gods and they need to conquer the world with their dragons is meant to give you vibes of Daenerys during the main series because that's what she planned to do when Jon Snow killed her. She wanted to conquer the entire world.
I can't.
You can't.
Daemon also says that their children will rule this empire for forever and a day. It's meant to be a reference to their two children, Aegon and Viserys, just reminding you that they are still part of the plot. They changed that from the Battle of the Gullet, like they were present there in the books. We'll explain what happens with them when we find out what the show is going to do, probably in the next couple of episodes. Ryan Condal did say that they just changed their storyline, so we'll find out what they're going to be doing with them pretty soon. Rhaenyra then reminds Daemon what her father told her next to Balerion the Black Dread's skull the night that he named her heir. Dragons are not meant to be trifled with, and when Daemon says he renounced his dragon, that dragon was Balerion. He became his dragon after he claimed him when he was named king, but he only rode him once, right after he claimed him, and then never rode him again. Soon after that, like this is right after he was named king, Balerion died of natural causes. My assumption is that we will never actually see a living version of Balerion until that Aegon's Conquest movie that they just announced they're going to be doing. But if you think that Vhagar is big, Balerion grew to be even bigger. Rhaenyra also reminds Daemon about the doom of Valyria, like, oh, you're talking about the dream of ancient Valyria, conquer the entire world, but remember, the doom happened to them, very ominous. Then the next day, she visits the small folk when she goes to the Sept and starts passing out all the food that they just stole from the rich. And back at the castle, when she goes back, she then denies Corlys' request to legitimize his sons. So, like, you win some, you lose some, and it seems like she's losing Corlys here too, because they really have it out over her not wanting to call any undue attention to her son Joffrey, who is very much a bastard. But it is wild here because Corlys is screaming at the top of his lungs about her children being bastards, so Luther Largent hears all this, and all the other people that are working in the castle behind them here, they heard him yell this too. And now there winds up being a massive gullet between the two of them. So it's just another example of a really powerful person that Rhaenyra needed on her team supporting her, who is probably not going to want to support her anymore. Kinda seems like everybody at every end of the spectrum here, all over the realm, highborn people, really powerful people, and the small folk are slowly starting to turn on her, and it's heading in a really bad direction. Rhaenyra then meets with Alicent to talk about the fake version of Daeron and agrees to spare him for Alicent and for him to take the black, but discovering then that he is a fake once Alicent notices him, like, no, that is definitely not my son. And Aemond has deceived them, and then they also learn soon after this that he's taken Tumbleton and all of her subjects hostage. So now there is a massive army of greens that she cannot burn. Like she says, I'm going to burn them all, but then the Dragon Keeper reminds her, well, you can't burn them because you'd be burning all your subjects too. Really starting to remind you of Daenerys wanting to burn them all, the people of King's Landing. Both the Lannister supporters, like Cersei's supporters, but also wound up burning a whole lot of innocent people and collateral damage too. So Rhaenyra doesn't want to do something like that. And I really love the way they end the episode of her looking at the burning pile, just a really great metaphor as she talks about burning them all as this giant fire erupts right in front of her. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below, and let me know if you spotted any Easter eggs or references in the episode that I didn't talk about in the video. My episode 4 trailer video will post next. Be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that, and my full episode 4 video will post next Sunday after they release it. Everybody click here for that video. I'll update the link as soon as I post it, and click here for all my other House of the Dragon episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.